And today's webinar, for me it is already, a little unusual. The format of webinars is a little unusual. Today's webinar, its main goal is to answer the user's questions, as well as show some tricks, and highlight the news that awaits us in the near future in anti-fraud systems. The first thing we'll start with is a little news, literally a 5-minute news block, that concerns the anti-detect of the 5th version. So, users who use the Patrio anti-detect, they can already download the anti-detect on the detect.expert website. For users of personal versions, we have made a release with many updates. We made it Microsoft friendly, as you know, or maybe you don't know. Just in case, I'll repeat it again. About 4, 5, 6 months ago, I don't know, it turns out that we received a letter, a printed letter from Microsoft. With a request from her, I'm lying, demanding to remove certain techniques that were used in the anti-detect, such as activators, TC selection and interference in telemetry and directs. But, unfortunately, this letter was not noticed because a paper letter in 2025 year. I do not know from whom it was possible to expect. And, as a matter of fact, that's why our software was poorly determined by antivirus systems, let's say. But now all the requirements of Microsoft have been met, so now there are no problems with antiviruses. With the new versions of the anti-detect, we were not singled out in a separate, let's say, category of malicious software. What are we expecting now? At the moment, we are waiting for a big update, signing drivers from Microsoft. And that's driver signing. It will allow us, first of all, to completely cure the black screen problem, since some users currently have it. And it is connected with the tail directs, namely with the VirtualBox incompatibility system, namely the VirtualBox, not the anti-detector and the host directs user. And after we get the signature, we will conduct the necessary tests. We will be able to enable an additional menu. In the anti-detect, it is already ready, with which you can finally change your fingerprints. That is, absolutely native canvas, WebGL, WebPoo and so on. Well, as for the prints, we will talk even more carefully today. I would also like to add that in the near future, we can expect from the anti-detector, including from the version of both the Patrio and the staff. Just the day before yesterday, Virtual Oracle, represented by its VirtualBox product, made a very interesting major release version 7.0 beta. In this release, they added support for ARM processors. Support for ARM processors now allows us to work with emulation of Android devices without any difficulty. That is, if earlier on the processor, on the MD host processor, working with Android virtualization was a thankless task. Absolutely thankless, now it's all much easier. And personally, I see this as a certain interesting development, that is, it is the virtualization of Android devices. In fact, the rest of the peripheral devices, you can call them that, such as a GPS sensor, accelerometer, and even the same indicators, they are prescribed in just a couple of dozen lines of code. Therefore, in principle, there is nothing complicated in adding such devices to our software in the future. Well, many thanks to Oracle for the titanic work they have done on their processor. I can't say that they did it perfectly, because there wasn't time to test it yet. Unfortunately, the experience of the previous release of VirtualBoxing shows that they can make a huge number of mistakes. And it feels as if the team has partially changed because, in fact, the work on updating the anti-detect of the 5th version consisted of 90% fixing oral bugs and 10% adding new functionality. But, as a matter of fact, we are now done with the anti-detect and will move on to our main topic. Why are we gathered with you today? Canvas. Our favorite canvas is probably the most famous of all the prints that exist. And he became famous thanks to the Leaks browser web resource because it was very simple and understandable by the user. Press the button, the numbers changed. Did not press the button, the numbers did not change. And, in principle, it was even possible to say everything on this. For a while, this imprint was incredibly relevant. Namely, since the 2013 year, I would say, probably 2019. Yes, somewhere in the 2019 year. Then, thanks to Chrome, again, Chrome is a trendsetter, an anti-fraud fashion. Thanks to the Chrome browser, this fingerprint has come to naught. And there were several reasons for that. The reasons were that, first of all, it was simply elementary to replace it. Canvas can be replaced with your hands by simply copying it from another computer, as I will show today. This is a godforsaken technology, but by the way, I broadcast about it in the year 2016-17 approximately. So I'll show it today. Because, oddly enough, this technology is one of those bearded ones. How old is she? Already. 8 years. I thought it had already lost its relevance forever, but no, it turns out to be more relevant now than ever. And, strictly speaking, it can be substituted by changing fonts, changing smoothing, changing the Clark type. There are a lot of variations. And of course, anti-fraud systems began to use the Canvas imprint not as a protection system, but as a kind of honeypot. But things are changing. And now, at the current time, already in our 2025 year, we see that we again have a need to change this imprint, unfortunately. Therefore, today we will look at some interesting topics that are related to it and how we will work with this imprint. The first thing I want to draw your attention to, let's look at how it is formed. Again, those who know, it's me every webinar where I touch the canvas, I always talk about it. But I want to say this just a couple of minutes. So, we have an image formed. This image is decomposed into pixels. Pixels turn into a byte array. A byte array is formed into a hash base 64. That, in fact, is how it all happens. The canvas is drawn on the user's computer, so the user has all the possibilities to change this fingerprint, and to control its formation, including the possibility that it cannot be formed at all. But you can simply respond with a predetermined response to the request of this fingerprint. And in fact, let's take a little more time to see how this print looks like. At the top, we have a screenshot, a small clipping from the site BrowserLeaks, and below, actually our imprint in its pure form. The fact is that the canvas print, the one that is present on the Leaks browser, it is in the hash. It is hashed for what? In order for the user to have the opportunity to at least visually distinguish it. Because if we take an actually clean print in the base 64 format, which you see just below, well, you must agree, if a web resource gives you such an imprint, well, it probably won't be very clear to you. And you won't really want to compare such large arrays of data with each other. So let's move on. What are we going to do with you? The first thing we start with. One moment. I'll ask someone again. Please check the sound. Otherwise, there are messages from users that there is no sound. Is there any sound? Can you hear me now? Yes, it's all good. That's it, thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, that's it. Then we score on the chat. In the chat, not paying attention to what's there, who has problems, solve them yourself. So, the first thing we will start with today. I'm turning on the screen demo now, and we're starting on a very simple topic called Canvas fingerprint cloning. In fact, you can take and clone a canvas print from any device, but there are some certain tricks here. By the way, I'm going to change the slide right away and recommend that you follow the link that I indicated. And I'll duplicate this link now in the general chat so that you don't have to type manually. This link contains 2 pieces of code that we will be working with today. So, back to our topic. In the distant 2016 year, or 2017, history no longer remembers, or rather I do not remember. There was a topic when we were working with a canvas print and we needed to transfer it between cars. Well, that's the question the user asked. It was interesting for me to explore this. I then showed this at a webinar that we conducted together with the open source portal. I showed how you can transfer a canvas print from one computer to another computer, or how to transfer it from a mobile device to a computer, and so on. Well, in general, there is not much difference. To do this, we used a browser extension called Tampermonkey. Tampermonkey, its icon is now on your desktop. Just in case, the title will be in the next slide, right now on your screen. Those who work with Tampermonkey probably understood or remembered how this happens. In fact, I will say for myself that the Temper is decoy, an absolutely free extension that can actually store more possibilities in itself in some way than even any anti-detect. That's how strange it is. Yes, it may not be very convenient for an uninitiated user to use this extension. But in fact, I will say that it is simply magnificent. It allows you to do incredible things, but in fact everything that we need, everything at all. Unless you delve into parameters, for example, such as performance, or getting network fingerprints, and so on. But everything that concerns the client side, with prints that are processed on the client. The Tampermonkey plugin allows us to change everything as we want without a license, without registration, without sums. As a matter of fact, that's what we're going to do now. I will show you a very simple example, and you will be able to recreate it, thanks to the 2 sections of code that I have published. So, the first place we are going now is to include a presentation of the screen, or rather a demonstration of the screen. The moment. So, the screen demonstration has begun. I see that, so, everything is okay with us, the pages are changing. Yes, everything is there. So, let's once again have a minimum of theory, a minimum of words. What is our canvas print? Here is our imprint. But not only this hash, but, as a matter of fact, the canvas itself is this picture that we see. That is, this picture with certain effects, with overlays and so on and so forth. We won't even go into that now. How is this picture formed? If we look at the source code of our page, we can find a specific piece of code. Here it is. Kindly, our developer of this web resource, who may even be present at the webinar now, showed us that here is a JavaScript that allows us to form our picture. And if we turn to our code now, where do I have this code? Come on now, so it's a little different. The moment. Canvas source. There is. In the script that I gave you, there is a part of the code at the bottom, part of the code of the canvas print. And our task is just now to test whether we can recreate this fingerprint, whether we can recreate the instructions that the web resource gave us in the form of a fingerprint. Let's press the F12 key in order to go to the console, and we insert it into the console like this. What the fuck do we have? Damn it, I've already forgotten how to do it. The moment is now christened, damn it, but fuck knows, I don't remember anymore. Experiments can be here. So, okay, the hell with it. Does not let us insert into the console. Why is it taking so long to search? I'll try to use Age. Age does not give us either, but it can be easier to do it all there. So, open the browser console. So, the moment. Apparently, we'll have to mess with this one a little bit now. With this idiocy. By the way, who has a quick solution of some kind? Maybe you will throw it off. Hello, pasting exactly. Sorry. Thank you. Listening for the English, this webinar will be on Russian language, and if you need translation to English, Vietnam or Chinese, we will publish it on in the next few days. So you don so, back we go. Sorry, I turn to our English-speaking colleagues. Go back to our console and enter hello past. There is. Actually, by the way, it's good that this happened, because suddenly users will have such a need, so we have this code that our users use. For example, who was our first user? The first stem. I am now posting a command to the general chat that you need to enter in order for you to be able to insert the code into the console. So, here we have entered our code into the console with you, press enter, and here we have received our canvas print. We can copy its copy link address and, accordingly, look at our fingerprint. And now there are very important moments. I ask you to turn on your brain and open your ears, because this is very important. This is our fingerprint, this is it. And actually, if we go back here now, we can click on it and we get the picture that we drew, that we wanted to draw. So now, thanks to the fact that we fully know which fingerprint is being requested from us, which picture, we can now do whatever we want with this fingerprint. Look here, I have a print like this right now. There are 4866 there and so on. Click on the icon of the Tampermonkey plugin. Well, for those who do not know, it is better to install it through the Chrome Store official. And when you install it, don't forget to enable the developer mod on the extensions tab. Unfortunately, it will not work normally for you without a developer mod. So, here we have a page with our browser links, and we have a plugin for Tampermonkey. Click on it with the left mouse button and create a new script. Here we will see the default markup, we don't need it. And we select the script we need and paste it here. That, in fact, is all we need to do. Almost everything. Click Save, then go into it again, change it on the Settings tab. Here on the Settings tab is the General item. We start this script at the document position. Start. That's it. Now we have this script will work. It will work when our page loads. Now we will refresh the page. Nothing will change with us because although it may change, I don't remember which print I sewed up here. Well, let's try. Updating our page. Here we have the temper of the monkey, showed that we use it, that it is turned on, our canvas print is used. Let's try to make some changes to it. How do I find this fingerprint? Where do we keep it? If we go with you to edit the script, then here we can see such a constant, which is called fake, and image data URL. Let's try it now. Conditionally, I will change it. Do not pay attention to what exactly, it does not matter now. I'm just testing now whether our fingerprint will change or not, and then I'll show you how to clone. As a matter of fact, I just changed it. Updating our page. We have not changed it. Let's check again so that everything works for us. I will restart Chrome. We go back to the web resource browser leaks. Perhaps the part that I just changed, it is not responsible for the specific formation of this hash. Let's try to change it again. Select Change Fingerprint. So let's go to the end And, for example, do not change, but delete a certain part. Well, like this. Let's see how our system reacts to these changes. We save it, go to the browser, update, and now we see that our fingerprint has changed, but we have lost all the PNG headers. Why did this happen? The fact is that when a web resource browser wants us to, he wants to get a fingerprint from us, he has a certain response syntax, and we have just violated this response syntax. Violated, because we deleted part of this print, we violated our image formation completely, and the picture, as we see, is our canvas. It is not shown because we have an error displaying it. How, for example, to copy a fingerprint? Let's go back to Edge again and go to the same site of the Leaks browser. Let's see what kind of fingerprint we have here. We have the same one here too. Okay. Let's turn it off then. For example, now we're going to turn something off here. Let's change our fingerprint, for example, in this way. Let's see if it works. It won't work. Yes, you see, our fingerprint, for example, has now changed. I have now turned on angle mode, accelerating the graphics of Direct 3D 11 on DirectX 12. So, here it is, our fingerprint. Cool. Let's now try to clone this fingerprint from the Edge browser. Or, for example, imagine that we do not have an Edge browser, but any other computer. What do we need to do? We do the same thing. We take our script, which displays the canvas print, press F12, open our console. The console is open. We write here exactly the same way. Fuck your mother. Yes. Well, in general, yes, we have a cool browser. Fuck you, the browser is called. Or fuck me, because I've already forgotten, damn, how it's shown here. Well. Here we have a moment. What do we have in this browser? Hello, pasting something he doesn't like. Let's do it differently. Let's not use the console. No, we will use the console. In any case, it is necessary to show. Okay, let's use it. Let's go back to our Chrome. Chrome is also not a good option. We still need to show about the transfer. Let's move it from the Firefox. Why not? In just a couple of minutes, I will download the Firefox browser. And we will try to transfer the canvas print from the Firefox inside to the Chrome. I'll talk a little for you for now. It may seem quite complicated for you, but in fact, it's a fairly simple task, and when you learn how to do it, it will be very easy for you. Unfortunately, we have something going on with the stream lags right now. So, I am informed that the stream has frozen. So, I'm going to try to restart the demo screen moment now. Well, unfortunately, yes, here we have such upsets. We haven't held webinars for a long time, and therefore, apparently, everything is going a little difficult this time. I'm literally asking for a couple of minutes. Yes, users report that we have a stream. There are problems with the stream, but everything is okay with my internet. Maybe it's ClickRally software. Unfortunately, today it wasn't even possible to connect a microphone to it normally, so we have to broadcast from the phone and run the ClickRally separately on the PC. So, while we are restarting the ClickRally, I want to continue. In fact, you have the opportunity to configure yourself and configure your browser, absolutely legitimate Chrome, without any add-ons. You can customize it for any web resource you are interested in. Not to mention the fact that I consider the full support of the Tampermonkey on the iPhone now, to be an incredibly interesting opportunity. And it's really cool, because if you learn how to do it on a computer, it won't be difficult for you to do it to reproduce everything on your phone, and accordingly, the percentage of passing with iOS will be much better than on any of the anti-detects. Plus, of course, we also do not forget about browsers such as Safari and the ability to transfer an imprint to an iPad. For example, not only Canvas. In fact, it is possible to transfer virtually all the prints that we need. We can transfer them between devices, including if we know that, for example, there is no possibility of any substitutions for a standard Safari on iOS, then thanks to the Tampermonkey plugin, you have the opportunity to actually create a new iPhone literally within a couple of minutes. I think it will be quite interesting for those who want to engage in self-education. So, we have our click rally, unfortunately, still does not want to start. Now, literally, I think we will decide within a few minutes, or there is a possibility that we will switch to another platform. Alas, the webinar web resource used to be good. Until they made an update. Unfortunately, we have to suffer constantly with this click rally. So, it seems that now there will be a connection to the screen. So, we are online. So, everything seems to be cool. It seems to have opened now with the second window. Tell me, open the webinar with the second window. Everything seems to have a demonstration of the screen. So, we are now in the Firefox browser. Go back to the Lix browser. Look at our standard fingerprint, which is here. Here we have it. 4647, and I closed Chrome. Back to our print. Here we have 48,166 of our prints. Well, that is, we see that they are different. Now let's transfer the fingerprint of the Firebox to our Chrome. To do this, let's use the Canvas source code again, and try to draw it in the Firefox. So, here we have executed our code, and now we have received our fingerprint. Let's copy it completely, starting with the date and ending with its equal sign. After that, we go, look at our fingerprint here again. Let's update Chrome. 48,166, it starts with us. We go to the Tampermonkey, open our script, and don't forget about the quotes. Where we have the date, we enter our fingerprint, copied from Fox's Fire. It seems that I entered it correctly. We save it, go to the page with the browser Lix, update our fingerprint, and now we see that our fingerprint has completely changed. It fully corresponds to the fingerprint of the Firebox. Well, here we see a complete match. And moreover, I will say for those who like to see what browsers we use here, the system now tells us that it is most likely that you are using a Firefox browser. your Windows operating system. Because according to the statistics of the Browser Leaks web resource, this fingerprint is present only in the corresponding versions of the Firefox. I think, in principle, the logic is clear to you, right? That is, you take, for example, make an example with the browser leaks. You first need to find the fingerprint. Then recreate it in the console of the browser you are interested in and then paste it into the browser you are interested in. But now let's fantasize a little bit about how you can do it in a different way. And in another way, you can make Tatiana incredibly simple. And I'm going to take this code now, thanks to which I have a canvas imprint formed. Where do I have it? Here it is. I'm going to take this code now and paste it on some web resource of my own that belongs to me. After that, I will enable logging of this fingerprint to the space of my web resource. And I'll buy a couple of million units of traffic. After that, I will have a huge database of these prints. In just half a day and for a couple of tens of dollars. Because the traffic in this case can be anything, there is not necessarily a sample either by country or by city, and so on. Well, although, for example, it would be interesting for me to study what canvas prints there are in one particular city. For example, relatively speaking, Israel, or, for example, the USA. And if we add here in addition, logging of the same web jail fingerprint, which you can also substitute, audio fingerprint, which you can also substitute, font fingerprint, then you actually have. Thanks to the fact that you send traffic to your site, you can collect the fingerprint database, and thanks to the Tampermonkey plugin, you can change these fingerprints on any web resource that you want. But there is a very important remark here, which I want to tell you about now. The fact is that this canvas, and not a print, but a print, too. This canvas is typical only for the resource browser leaks. And that means what? And this means that this code will form only this picture, and it is inherent only in this resource. If you want to work with, for example, PayPal or Stripe, or Gmail, any web resource, your main task is to determine which canvas print is used there. What a picture! To do this, you do not need to be 7 spans in the forehead, absolutely. You can just copy here exactly like I did, open the source code of the page, and send it to the GPT chat. He will specifically give you the code that you need to enter into the console. And so you can recreate this fingerprint on your PC, and, accordingly, insert it, for example, on your web resource. This technology is more complicated than the use of anti-detects. It is more complicated than the use of anti-detect browsers, for example, which are popular in fact only because of their convenience. But it allows you to work very purposefully, that is, to make changes with surgical precision for absolutely any web resource. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that at the moment how this technology works, just in case, I will mention it again. A web resource makes a request to our browser for rendering. The request passed, but the Tampermonkey's response intercepts and, accordingly, shows whether the browser gives the fake data to the web resource. And you can substitute them as you want, absolutely as you like. I repeat, those who will be attentive and read between the lines what I'm saying, you can independently, for minimal money, absolutely minimal, create a unique anti-detect for yourself personally, which will use the official version of the browser, and which will allow you to change virtually all of your existing fingerprints. Because what kind of prints are we interested in? Canvas is changing. WebGL can give the same example. Changing. The font fingerprint changes, the client track changes, the audio fingerprint changes. In fact, everything if you do not go into deep matters, such as, for example, the imprint of the engine and so on. Although, in principle, they can also be substituted. But you can substitute everything basic, everything that web resources interact with. However, I repeat, each web resource has its own canvas. Well, for example, each web resource draws its own picture. How to determine this, I will not show now. Literally, there are a couple of webinars ago, and on YouTube you can find. In principle, the plugin is called for Firefox. The plugin is called Canvas Defender, if I'm not mistaken. Here it will allow you to determine which image a particular resource uses. Plus, I repeat, you can take the source code of the page, upload it to the GPT chat. The GPT chat will find you where the canvas is formed, where the web gel is formed, which specific shapes are formed. And accordingly, you will be able to recreate this fingerprint and actually steal it from any other user. I think that who has heard about such markets as Genesis, for example, yes. Remember that. Here this web resource existed and actually did exactly the same as I am showing you now. And all the web resources that at the moment, in addition to Genesis, that sell prints, for example, they sell. They get them in exactly the same way. In other words, they get legitimate fingerprints from real users and then, accordingly, sell them to you. Well, which of you will be smarter? He will be able to open such a shop himself and earn a couple of tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars to sell it to those people who do not want to do it manually, on their own. Here. So here's an interesting feature. By the way, about that script I gave you. I gave you a simple script for Tampermonkey with all the comments. You can feed it to GPT chat, but the model fits basically only for about mini high. Remember that. She's better at code than 4.0. You can feed this squeak to the GPT chat, and again, even if you don't have programming knowledge, I just perfectly understand, because not everyone here has it. If at least 10% have some experience in programming, then the remaining 90% have no such experience. Therefore, use the G5 chat. Feed him a script, tell him, add a web gel here. He will add a web gel to you, add audio, and so on. I took Canvas as the most popular example, the most popular print. Well, again, there are absolutely a lot of opportunities. We have just made the Lix browser see from the official Chrome that we are using Firefox. Without a license, without registration, and without sums. It's fun, isn't it? This is the kind of anti-detecting you can do yourself. But we're not done with that yet. The fact is that in addition to the canvas itself, we have now finished with the topic of cloning prints. If, by the way, it will be interesting, if there is suddenly a request from users, I wanted to offer two interesting points. Now I'll tell you which ones. If, for example, there is a request from you, my dear listeners of this webinar, I can publish an extension for Chrome on my detect.expert website. I wrote it about 3 years ago. In principle, it can be updated. This extension, it collects all variants of Canvas from web pages, plus not only pictures, but also immediately their base 64. If it's interesting, that is, it's like a detector. I wrote it for one of the webinars, but, unfortunately, it never came in handy. If you are interested, I can publish it on my web resource. In principle, it's just a matter of updating it for a couple of hours there. So, let's move on. Immediately here, the user asks the question U1212. I saw a question now I want to answer. What about shaders? Everything changes completely. I'll explain why again. The image is not rendered on the server. It happens on the client. And in fact, you look like as it were, you have shaders of the 3rd version, the 4th version, the 5th version. I don't care at all, I don't give a shit. Why? Because you don't process the picture, you just substitute the answer, and that's it. In other words, you can. By the way, why not? I just came up with such an interesting idea. Thanks to this Tampermonkey, for example, you can turn a server into a home computer. An interesting topic, by the way. Look here, let's develop a little topic came to me. You rent a server somewhere in the USA, Detect, some still work with Detect, but unfortunately, Detect does not have a video card because therefore he will always have a canvas print corresponding to the Windows server. And accordingly, there is no video card on the WebGL. And now you can turn a Detect into a home computer, for example, which is located in the USA. Passes all the Lottie tests and so on. In my opinion, a cool option. So once again, I repeat, I'm finishing off the answer for the user 1212. We fake the answer. We are not trying to fake the image formation process, or the audio formation process, or anything else. We just fake the answer and that's it. That is, it is possible in principle, it is possible to replace the temper of the semolina. If anyone wants to go even further, I'll tell you what can be replaced. In principle, the use of the developer mod, and the use of the Tampermonkey plugin in one image or another, in one area or another, can theoretically, of course, be calculated. Yes, here, but again, I, for example, do not know such techniques. If you know, post it in chats somewhere and let's find a solution. Why not? But for those who want to go even deeper, you can use Charles Proxy. Basically, you don't need interference with it because you can just fake the response itself. Well, in short, it's already, let's say, a complex topic. I gave you a direction, and then you can develop it yourself. I will answer all the other questions that you ask at the end of our webinar in order not to be interrupted. So the question of users with 12 came to hand here, let's say. Well, in the context, it's very good. So, we are moving on with you. What's our next topic? We have reviewed the cloning of our fingerprints, you can repeat it all at home. I gave you all the codes. But there is another important point. Canvas, unfortunately, it is also progressing. In other words, right now, we see only one canvas print on your screens. One. Oh, by the way, I'm going to turn off our monkey tempo now. Okay. Let's take a look, by the way. Here we have 46, 47, and I turned off Firefox. Updating the page. 48 166 Chrome. Please. So, before you now is the simplest type of canvas print. The type that was invented back in the distant 2013 year, when canvas technology was introduced. And the developers realized that it was different on different devices. But canvas prints don't really exist alone, there are many of them. In other words, how should I put it to you, the methodology, the basis, the foundation, he is one. But the formation and branches of it are slightly different. What do I mean by that? I made you this page today before the webinar. I'll drop her source code, not the source code, I'll drop her address here in the chat now. Yes, there is no domain, and there is no domain on purpose I made. I'll tell you why later. So, here is a small page that currently has 14 different methods of checking the canvas print. 14. In fact, I'll tell you this is what I had enough time for. You can increase it, well, approximately, well, what I have in my head, about 35. 36, 37 different checks of the Canis fingerprint. Why am I saying all this? I want to tell you about some interesting points now, because there is theory, and there is practice. What in theory can be a great, wonderful, fucking solution, in practice, it can turn out to be absolutely non-working. In what way am I saying this? Imagine how the anti-fraud system works. There is a trusted company, for example, there is a company, for example, CyberSource. CyberSource company protects web resources. How do they form this protection at all? It's one thing when they sat in the lab and made this protection on their own, right? But another thing is, if they put this protection into practice now, in production, then the results of this protection may be inversely proportional to why it was made. In other words, nothing will work. Therefore, absolutely all anti-fraud systems act in the same way. They take a new technology, implement it on a web resource, and it is there, but it brings absolutely no results, and in no way affects the passage of payments, for example, or something else. Why is this happening? There is a so-called process of correlation of results. In other words, they take already working solutions and take a new solution. The working solution continues to perform its functions on this web resource, and the new solution works as if in a sandbox. In other words, it does not perform any functions, but it logs. Logs for what? In order to then be able to correlate the results and check the results of an existing solution and a new solution. And if the results of a new solution are not worse than the results of an already working one, then this technology will be implemented. It was the same with the canvas print. The canvas print as we know it, here it is by the way, on method number 1. I didn't bother, I just copied this fingerprint from the Lix browser site, as you can see. So, this imprint and its technology, it exists at the moment on most web resources. But in addition to this, several very interesting technologies have appeared, again, techniques that come out of our first one. And the technique that I want to analyze first now is called splitting into 3 parts and combined verification. Or, more scientifically, we can call it a segmental canvas. What does this mean? Segmental canvas allows this image, let's zoom in a little, allows this original image to be divided into 3 parts. Why is this being done? The fact is that if we use, for example, some kind of anti-detect with the function of replacing the canvas print, or we use some kind of extension, what will happen? When composing one image, the substitution technology will be applied once, and, accordingly, the print will be modified once. But if we divide this picture, this long big picture, if we divide it into 3 parts or more, then the anti-detect browsers, they will apply substitution technology to each picture separately. And what it will lead to, I'll show you now. So let's open our extension with you again and go to the Chrome Web Store. Let's find some extension here. I even know which one, really. Canvas Fingerprint. Canvas Fingerprint, okay. And here we have the very first Canvas Fingerprint Defender extension. Let's add it to our Chrome. There is this extension added, it sends us to its page in order to show what kind of unpublished guys they are. How cool they changed the fingerprint. Well, let's see. So, we take our Canvas Defender from them. Well, let's see now whether it works or not. We remember MD5 hash from our first, with our first substitution of the canvas print. As we can see, I am updating the page now. We see that every time the page is updated, our fingerprint changes. In other words, the technology works, everything is cool. But what will our second technique, the segmental canvas technique, tell us about this? We see that now substitution does not occur for one single image, but it occurs separately for each image. And so then, after the first image has been rendered, the second and the third, the system generates a single image from these images, and if this one single image does not match its hashbase 64, does not match the usual single-pass canvas, then in this case, the system sees that a substitution is being used. I repeat, we see that we do not have the same value. Yes, let's refresh the page now. Here we see our fingerprint is changing, but nothing matches. If we take and disable this extension now, so we turned it off, we're going back. Now we're all okay. That is, without substitution, everything works great for us. In other words, this is at least the first method that is now, for example, used by the Stripe system. Who works with Stripe? That's largely the reason for, let's say, your troubles. Let's move on. The next technique that we have is an inverted canvas. Inverted canvas is quite an interesting technique. I didn't insert a check of it here, but I want to tell you in more detail. The fact is that when drawing our first canvas, our ideal, let's call it the reference canvas, we can have certain effects and noises in certain parts of this image. If we flip this image, then these effects will be exactly in the same place. They are applied in exactly the same way as in the standard. And then, after the canvas has been drawn first ordinary, then inverted, there is also a correlation process. And the image of the inverted canvas is compared with the first one. They will be different. Therefore, the inverted canvas is turned over 180 degrees again, and its hash is obtained once again. Thus, we have a canvas fingerprint check 3 times. That is, the first fingerprint is checked as a reference, the second fingerprint is checked inverted, and the third fingerprint. The third fingerprint is checked inverted, inverted again. Well, I'm sorry, I wrapped it up. Here. This technique, it allows you to calculate the use of anti-detect systems with even greater accuracy than the method of dividing the canvas into 3 parts. This technique, if anyone is interested, it is called Canvas tool. I can't tell you why such an abbreviation is, I didn't call it that, but if you're interested, you can get acquainted with it. This technology, it is used, if we take, for example, large web resources, it is used on the Chase resource. I won't tell you what kind of resource it is. Who needs it, he understood, and who does not need it. There is nothing to start working with this resource. But specifically if, for example, a segmental canvas is used by a Stripe, then an inverted canvas tool is used by Chase as one of the options for those who want to build their work correctly. I also recommend paying attention to this. I added fingerprinting here just to understand that hardware acceleration works for us. Well, as a matter of fact, here we still have a reverse coup. Well, the same thing that was done here, yes, here. But here now we have canvas substitution turned off. Come on. Is it turned off or is it on? Yes, you see, look, I'll show you now. The flip method, here is an inverted canvas, I have it implemented here in method number 5. In other words, our first canvas, here is its hash, this is an ordinary canvas. Our second canvas is an inverted canvas. And our third hash is the canvas turned upside down once again. And we see that our data from the inverted canvas once again does not match our reference canvas. And the differences are as much as 13,440 bytes. Quite a lot. The technique works perfectly. You can check it, by the way, with your anti-detects. And just in case, no, then at the end I'll tell you about the anti-detects. So here is an additional technique, who works with whose banks, you can directly contact the bank more precisely. You can directly pay attention to this technique, since it is used everywhere there. Let's move on. Well, few people have heard, it's not very interesting yet. We have pictures of our canvas. They are formed in PNG format, but it is also possible to draw vector graphics in SVG format. And the same thing that I showed you right now, the technique, that is, the rendering technique, the method of splitting into 3 parts, the method of revolution. In addition to the PNG format, it can also be applied to the SVG format, that is, to vector graphics. And, accordingly, the number of canvas prints we receive increases exactly twice. Well, there are techniques with which you can get. Let's move on. The next moment. Here we see we have a canvas interception check. An extension has been detected. We see, yes. But I'm not going to comment on anything special here. It's just like one of the options I added here for demonstration. With us, we see that if we disable the extension now, then, as you can see, there are no traces of expansion. Everything has become okay. Next. Method number 8. A very interesting technique that is used now in most payment gateways is: look at this blue square, what is it remarkable for? In fact, nothing. This blue square doesn't even have some kind of text, right? Well, here we have at least seen the text, we have seen some effects. Here we don't see any shit at all. That is, a stupid blue square is not an imprint, it's some kind of bullshit, right? You will think the same. Surely you will think exactly the same as I just said. If you switch to many, I won't say which ones, now I won't even say from memory. For example, to many sites related to online payments. PayPal as an example. Why not? Who else is working with him there? Yes, I'm not even going to list everyone right now. This canvas print, this canvas is pretty evil. It can be blue, it can be white, black, red. You won't even pay attention to him. You will think that this is some part of a web resource. It can be in the form of a square, it can be a circle, it can be a line. And he happens to be a line, by the way, most often. You might think that with the help of some extensions, you will find all the prints, all canvas pictures that use a web resource. And you will think that this line, for example, or a square means absolutely nothing. But in fact, this is an incredibly important thing, and I will explain to you now why. We are turning it on now on our usual system. We check, there is no noise, the result is perfect. We turn on the substitution system, go here, update the page, noise or modification is detected. Why does this detector happen, and how does it work? Probably, of all that I have shown today, this is the worst detector. And why is he the most evil? Because he's fucking masked. It just disguises itself as some kind of line, I repeat, which can be confused with a spare part of a website, let's call it that. The fact is that in this case, the entire canvas space, is filled with one single color, with one single effect. And if your anti-detect is a browser, or in my case, for example, an extension. If this extension uses canvas substitution technology and noise technology, for example, then it will change. Start changing some pixels. In this case, when drawing this square, circle, triangle or line. And so we know that we have a reference result, and we know that we have a result that we get with differences when any of the substitution systems is used. Here is this system, you can meet it, I repeat, a lot of places, and you cannot even pay attention to it, I repeat. Because it does not look like a protection system, it's just a figure. But nevertheless, this system is the cornerstone of why many users cannot bypass this or that anti-fraud system. Because this simple blue square, black, red, no matter what, it will detect all your substitutions. Elementary simple, right? Therefore, I ask you to pay attention to this. Method number 9, don't bother with it. Consistency of image data to URL. Look, we have 7,500 pixels different. We turn off our plugin, update, the pixels differ by 0. What does this mean? This means that fingerprint generation and fingerprint request can be performed in different ways. In this case, in the absence of any extensions in our browser, we have a complete match when requesting a fingerprint in one way, one method and another. In the same case, if we turn on the substitution extension, we get the result of 7,500 out of 10,000. That's 75%. 75% of canvas prints will differ from each other. I'm not going to delve into these parameters now. If someone is interested, you can just Google them and understand, strictly speaking, how they are formed and so on. In fact, I will say this, the acceptable value of the pixel difference is the value 1. All that is more, if more than one pixel is different, then this is the use of an anti-detect with probability. Well, I don't know, it's hard to say so, I won't go into the absolute, but I would say so. If I formed some kind of anti-fraud system, I would say so, I would add for it approximately 15 points out of 100. For this testicle here. Testicular get and sword date, to date URL. Method number 11. Method number 11 on my computer is not worth paying attention to, because this method allows you to check the compliance of dp. That is, dots per inch to the resolution of our screen. And I use a large monitor, I use a scaling system, and therefore I will always have this value, well. It will always be suspicious, let's say. I don't want to pay much attention to it, but I want to tell you that in some cases, even when. Well, I'll tell you about superintelligences. I have come across many times in practice when people buy a 4K monitor, a small 4K monitor, there are, in my opinion, 27 inches. Yes, 27 inches, but 4K, and they have a very small image on the screen. Do you know what they do? They don't zoom in, no. They change the resolution from 4K to HD to Full HD, and then everything becomes big, everything is cool, good. And then they wonder why the fuck they don't have a damn thing working on such a machine. But because such a machine has absolutely abnormal indicators up to a pixel. That is, the number of dots and the number of pixels per inch. Therefore, if you suddenly want to use on a small monitor that supports 4, 5 or 8 resolution extensions, it is better to use scaling rather than change your 4K monitor to a regular Full HD, as I just told you. We will ignore method 12, you absolutely do not need it. Well, and the method of also requesting canvas using an iframe and adding additional layers, an alpha layer for image formation. I'm not going to rant much here. Double alpha is not some serious detection, more laboratory. I have never seen it in practice, although in principle it can work, and this method is especially good for identifying virtual machines. In particular, for example, virtual boxing is detected by them for 1 or 2. Well, at least the old versions. Now, if we take the 5 virtual boxes, all this is enough of this detector to determine the use of a virtual machine. Well, the last detector that we have today is a canvas fingerprint, which we can form in a browser window and a waveframe. In this case, we have it again as 2 different prints. And so we see that even when we refresh the page, these fingerprints are different. If we turn off our plugin, make an update, then everything matches for us. Here is virtually everything with prints, and I want to draw your attention now to a few more very important and slippery points. First of all, this web resource is based on the link that I have indicated to you. It will not work for a long time. He will work, well, maybe, I don't know, a week or 2 and so on. What do you need to do? With the right mouse button, we look at the source code of the page, and here we find everything completely, with comments. with everything you need. This site is one page, so if you copy all its contents, and save, for example, on your PC, it will be a great option. A great option. But there is another interesting trick. Do you want me to show you? I'm telling you now. Look here, we turn on our extension again. Yes, we turned it on. We reduce the print. Look, our fingerprint is changing. Yes, it is changing, that is, the extension works. We see, right? Okay. But this is when requested by a web resource. And what happens if we open the same web resource, but locally? Interesting, isn't it? Look, how can we have this? Here we have a web resource open, we update it, everything changes with us. Here we have our local web page is open, and it does not change. Of course, for webmasters, and for those who understand how web resources work, this is not a mystery at all. There is nothing supernatural here. Just different methods of processing query responses. Right. Here. But why am I showing it all? You can make an interesting test with your anti-detection browsers. The fact is that if your anti-detect browser works on the principle of such extensions, noises, or adding an injection of some code, then with a high degree of probability, I can tell you that when checking on a local computer with such a simple test, no fingerprint will change and you will have your real fingerprint is shown. If this happens, then you know that you are using far from the best substitution system. And in general, since we are talking about the antidote of browsers, I would like to share one interesting observation. The fact is that there are rarely cases when users come to consult me, and they say, for example, "Vector, thank you for everything. You're a fucking guy, but unfortunately, we can't. So it's very inconvenient for me to have several thousand virtual machines on one computer. If you had made some solution of your own, where a virtual machine would occupy 2 megabytes of RAM there, for example, I would certainly use your solution. As it is, I have to use an anti-detector browser. Please help me in any way to make it work." And this happens, indeed, people come with such requests, and sometimes I have to pay attention to the anti-detect browsers. What do I want to tell you? Check this test in your anti-detection browsers. You can check it for now, for example, well, here's a specific link that I gave at a specific IP address. You can click on it and see how your fingerprint changes. Or you can save it locally and leave it as your best canvas checker, in fact, for many years to come. Here, but what I want to note from myself is that, alas, not even a more or less competent substitution is used everywhere. In other words, the first method, yes, changing the fingerprint, or, as by analogy with the tempera. The same code is simply transmitted, that is, stolen from someone as a fingerprint. But if you go further already in the methodology, for example, of the same segmented canvas or tooler canvas, then, unfortunately, these software already stop working. I'm not talking for everything, but the ones I tested, none of them worked. Therefore, if anything, share information, share either comments on YouTube under this video, if this video is published. Or maybe it will be interesting to look at your experience in anti-detect chats. Does your anti-detection browser work with this web resource? Does it pass all checks? And also, does it work with a local web resource? That is, if you save this page and run it on your PC. I strongly advise you to keep this page after all, because it will be your ideal checker. Well, at least, the perfect Canosa checker. And now that we're talking about checkers, I want to tell you the following. Idiocy, utter idiocy drives people who are trying to work with their resources and check themselves on checkers. I have already said many times that I'm not even sure about the leaks browser, I'll tell you honestly. I know who its developer is, but for what purpose, and how they further process the information, I can't tell you. Because I don't have such data. I'm not going to make it up now and so on. But tell me, is there any sense, let's imagine in a browser, is there any sense, for example, to contain a web resource that uses, first of all, a fairly powerful server that will cost, well, let's say at least $200 a month. Let's do it like this, in small things. And also who will use an anti-frit system worth $4,000 a month. What do you think? It's just that some kind uncle, fucking bitch, Santa Claus, took and created such a kind web resource, right? What a fucking fucked up world we live in. He created it for us, we can use it. Super, right? Happiness, bitch, fuck. I'm showing you. I didn't even enter a normal address for this shit. A good web resource, right? Familiar to you all, switch to it before work, and then reset the screenshots. And why do I have, bitch, fuck, is there anything different in this fucking site? Yes, let's turn on our brains a little bit now. Click, or rather go to the Chrome browser, /2 of Webert's internals. We are updating this miracle page of this kind Santa Claus. Fuck, we press start. Sorry, I'm already blunted here. We get this kind of bullshit. And here in ICE servers, we copy this inscription here. She happens to be like this, and she also happens to be like this. Cool, right? Nothing tells you absolutely nothing. And I'll tell you that if you take and Google either the first domain or the second domain, then you will find such a wonderful system here. Under the name Treat Matrix firm LexisNexis. I've talked about this shit many times already. No, I'm not going to say that it's shit. This is a great system in terms of anti-fraud, it's a great system. But they have some interesting points. The first point is that their site is not loading for some reason. Because I don't have it loading very well on my Arabic iPad, but I'm sure you have it. Let's even reset it to the general chat now. The moment. Yes, I have reset everything. Well, you can accordingly go yourself and see. I'm not loading yet, well, to hell with it. So, this wonderful system, which is called Treat Matrix, a product that was made in collaboration with the LexisNexis anti-fraud system, has some features. Feature number 1 is that they have a fairly rigid custom new, that is, in other words, it's not some kind of IP data or IP info, where you can just go in and register, pay for a subscription. No. You will be asked on which resource you will use it. They will want to meet with you personally via video, they will want to talk to you. Provide us with your web resource, show us where you will use it, and who are your customers. And so on. That is, to pass this custom well, it's not easy, I'll tell you so. This is the number 1 moment. Moment number 2 at the moment, for 2025 year, I do not know. I do not have this system connected to the detect.expert website, but its cost, the last time I communicated with them, was $4,000 a month. This is about payment. Just about paying for this system. Well, if we take another interesting point, the third interesting point, then this wonderful company Treat Matrix always knows. Because it goes to its servers, it always knows where the connection comes from. In other words, connect always comes from this web resource, absolutely always, and cannot be substituted in any way. Accordingly, the anti-fraud system knows about this, right? An interesting situation. But the most interesting thing is also, moment number 4 I want to tell you. When you do go to this fucking site, which I don't have a fucking load, then you can find the forma there. Here it is, it's loaded. Wonderful. Then you can find a feedback form there. If this feedback form is with various of these, tell me, departments. You can find a feedback form with various LexisNexis departments. You can contact them by email. Or you can personally contact them on LinkedIn. So, if you take and compose a letter in which you write that, my dear LexisNexis, do you know that your wonderful anti-fraud system is used as a checker in the dark community on such and such a site? Do you know what the LexisNexis system will answer you? Not a fucking thing. Not a fucking thing at all. In other words, the message will be read, but no one will ever answer it. Do you know why? But because every fucking time you go to this web resource, they take you and a fucking big fat dick is shoved into your ass. Here I went through a virtual machine, I'm not afraid, so here. But every time you switch to this Honeypot before work, which collects all your fingerprints, which collects your IP addresses, and which can actually have LexisNexis. What? A top pro product that sees that no one will go to this web resource on pixel scan, neither a housewife, nor some accountant, nor a businessman, no one will go to it except for our community. And accordingly, if a person has switched to it, then this person is definitely a fraudster, anyway. So, accordingly, your proxies are being killed for fuck's sake, your fingerprints are being killed for fuck's sake. And do you know what it is? Do you know what they give you in return? They give you nothing in return, a tick. They give you a tick, bitch, a tick. It's like imagine, I don't know, let's invent a story about some there. Jean-Paul Van Donna. Imagine, there lived in France, for example, a man like this, his name is Jean-Paul Van Don. And this Jean-Paul Van Don comes to the police station and says, so and hello, policeman. Look, I changed my fingerprints, I changed the gun. Vi, you're so smart. Let's compare it. Listen, you used to have such prints, but now you have. Oh, you got a new one already. Well done. What kind of gun do you have? Show me. And your gun is different, not like the bitch it used to be. Well, Jean-Paul Van Down, you're doing great. They give him a green tick, and Jean-Paul Van Down goes to commit crimes. That's about the analogy you can give with those people who use these checkers. And another plus is that they unite in a community in Telegram, where they share methods of anti-fraud bypass. Bravo. Just bravo. You are much smarter than us, you probably have an extra chromosome. I can't call such people anything else. Therefore, well, what can I tell you? I say every webinar, the most important anti-detect is in your head. Learn to analyze what you are given. And it's not always the kindest person who is next to you, or some miracle web resource, or some miracle product, is aimed at helping you. You know, there is a very interesting saying, if you are given something for free, then remember the product is you. Well, that's about something like that. I don't remember how it sounds, but it can be clearly, specifically applied here. We're done with this bullshit, I can't call it anything else. By the way, I wanted to say this not only about this checker, but about the others in the same way. That's why I can't say about everyone, but specifically, It's obvious to use anti-fraud for $4 plus another server, right? Bitch, that's Santa Claus, fuck. Well, I don't believe it, and I'll never believe it. And I will never believe that this is not a product from the Treat Matrix company itself, which in the most magnificent way took and fucked all the idiots who use this resource. But we are finishing now with the bad, we are returning to the good. And we have a good one now. And we don't have anything good. Now you can see on the screen that we are using Chrome version 137. Chrome version 137, I recently made, by the way, an announcement about changes in the Chrome version 137, but I am now, our time is already coming to an end. I won't be for a long time now. I'm not going to look at it for a long time now, I'm just going to tell you about some interesting points that you should pay attention to. There is a new network protocol called Web Transport. It's not very new, to be honest. Web Transport. If you are interested, you can familiarize yourself with its API and so on. The Web Transport Protocol is a new protocol that allows. It appeared a long time ago, but its web resources are starting to be implemented more and more. It is the changes that are associated with the 137th version of Chrome that now allow you to request an IP address. Remember the Quick protocol. Quick. And now, in addition to this, it is still possible to request an IP address via Web Transport. Plus, Web Transport supports the so-called ping-pong very well. In other words, the Web Transport establishes a connection with the client and periodically makes requests to it. Request response. And thus, an analog of the most common ping. In this way, it can determine at what point, how far from the source of the IP address the client is located. An excellent technique that allows you to determine the use of a proxy quite accurately at the moment, but, at least, with a large distance of the subscriber from the proxy source. So just in case, I want to draw your attention to this. Well, there is one more interesting thing that I would like to go into much more seriously, but again, we don't have much time to consider it anymore. So I'm just going to give it, let's say, as a read on ShadowRealm. What is ShadowRealm? ShadowRealm is, so to speak, a new API that allows us, which more precisely allows web resources to run scripts, without the possibility of changing them. Imagine that, relatively speaking, this ShadowRealm API is like a VPN inside your browser. And at the moment, there are no techniques even close that allow you to change the data obtained using the Shadow API. Don't be afraid about Canvas or WebGL, for example, or other prints, they can't be obtained using the ShadowRealm API, well, at least in its current configuration. But the ShadowRealm API gives new opportunities in the fingerprinting of the browser, namely in the section of its performance, and in the section of its engine and all the insides. For myself, I can say that at the moment I have found only 4 new prints that you have not heard about yet, about which there is very little information. Well, you can basically find a ShadowRealm fingerprinting. You can find it on the internet. There are, by the way, quite a few interesting scientific papers on this subject this year. We are looking for a PDF file type. So, this API in the near future, as I can suspect, will be implemented by anti-fraud systems for more accurate fingerprinting and user identification. Since, again, its structure, it does not allow for any substitution on the side of plugins, extensions, and everything else. That is, or completely rewrite browsers. I do not even know how much this method is subject to any modifications, but in fact, this method is very interesting in what? A long time ago I said that Chrome, the Chrome browser in the foreseeable future, We'll have a technique that allows you to determine whether the real browser is being used or some modified one. And here, in particular, ShadowRealm allows you to implement this. In other words, it allows you to determine whether a real browser is being used or some kind of modified one. So, if you are interested, we can hold a separate webinar. And, in principle, this API is not enabled by default in the Chrome browser yet. Here, but under its inclusion, it is already planned in version 138 as an experiment. By the way, here let me take a look now just in case. No, not yet, but version 138, we can already see it on the Chrome Flex tab. If you are interested, you can use the Chrome Canary build and look at the interaction with this API data there. Also, I would like to draw your attention to something else, unfortunately. We have not implemented it in the 137th version now, although we promised. In the near future, the SwiftShader will be completely removed, that is, the one where we have a video card. That shows that we have hardware acceleration enabled and so on. If we do not have hardware acceleration, but there will be software acceleration, then we will not have a web gel. This is the official position of Google, and they plan to introduce this feature in the 137th browser. They made an announcement, but apparently something happened at the last moment, and they decided to wait until version 138. So now the use of browsers on servers, for example, where there are no video cards, will be visible. Or the use on old virtual machines, in which we were, for example, the anti-detect of the 4th version, where we used only software acceleration, will be visible and, accordingly, users will be faced with the fact that they work with their own resources they can't. So, we are done with our topics for today. Let's get into the answers to your questions. I am completing the screen demonstration about the canvas substitution system with the help of Tampermonkey. I don't want to say that this is some kind of new system. I said that it was shown back in the 16th-17th year. It ceased to be relevant because there was a boom in anti-detection browsers, and in fact, no one wanted to bother with it. But now, I would say that this system is much better than, probably, any anti-detect in fact. Because, again, you can transfer all this to Safari and, accordingly, you can make it all work on iPad and on iOS. This is a key feature, so who knows, maybe someone will run right now after the webinar, or during the webinar, to implement it all. And hit the jackpot, let's say, while others are thinking. And, by the way, there is a video on YouTube, a link here on the slide. The video was not recorded by me, but in principle, it is quite informative, and you can use similar videos. Find them on YouTube and make an interesting product. So, let's go back, or rather, let's move on to our questions. There are a lot of them here right now. 290, how many of us are there? Oh my God! We almost reached 300 people today. I didn't keep track of the number of participants, maybe more. So, let's move on to the questions. I'm sorry if I miss someone, but I'll try to answer all the questions. So, the question is from the user Spady. When will there be a full-fledged video guide on personnel? Spady, I want to answer in fact. Of course, I would like to make a guide when there is already a system, a separate menu for replacing canvas and jelly, and so on. Here, but we are waiting here, literally at any minute, we can get the signature of the drivers. I'll say this for myself. Microsoft is a fucking random, and I wouldn't ask any specific deadlines. I have an alternative option. I plan to make a video guide on Patreon this weekend, and in principle, it will partially be suitable for personal computers. Well, there just won't be one additional menu with some functionality. So I will try very hard to make every effort so that the information appears on the current weekend. I can't promise 100%, but I will do my best. English was a very large block of English questions. English speaking, I'm sorry. I won't have them. I'm not going to voice them now. So, a question from a Coca user. And won't anti-fraud systems scorch the expansion of the temper of the semolina? Great question. Remember, at one of the webinars, I showed a system that allowed me to determine the presence of extensions in Chrome. By the way, it is still relevant at the moment. The fact is that each extension has a certain ID. You can view it on the Developers tab. Even now, I'm going to turn on the screen demonstration. The moment. I'll show you, and yes, there is. I'm turning it on now. Good question, I like it. So, please pay attention. That's when we turn off the developer mod, we don't see it. When we turn on the developer mod, we have an ID for each extension. Here is this ID. Absolutely every extension has it, without exceptions. So, web resources can request you to extend a particular ID by its ID. They can't. Web resources can't request all the extensions you have, but they can request an extension for some specific ID. And, accordingly, how is detect.expert treated? First of all, you can track when a web resource requests. If you are more precise, a web resource requests an extension from you. This is the first one. Second, the simplest point. You keep the pace of decoy on your computer, just download this extension with Chrome. Then you change his ID simply through a text editor, and then load it back into Chrome. That's it. You already have a different ID and, accordingly, an anti-fraud system, if it requests a Tampermonkey extension. They will not be able to determine that you have it present. So, let's move on. I hope I answered your question. Well, in fact, I would also like to add that, of course, if we develop the topic, and it would be possible to make a temp detic in another way. I'll tell you what kind of method it is now, well, just in case, maybe you will be interested. But this is a purely laboratory method. Imagine that you have more than one canvas, but you have a lot of them. That is, the temper of the monkey is adjusted, mainly adjusted to 1, but it can also be made to 2, to 3, to 4, to 5, to 6. Here. And in principle, if you do it in such a way that it shows several random pictures at once, then you can determine that the temperature of the dummy is used in principle. That is, in practice, this is in the laboratory, I repeat, how this technique will show itself in practice. When working with conventional browsers, I can't say. And I have not met anywhere where there would be random canvases, that is, random rendering, I mean a random image. That's how we have a browser. It's unlikely that something else will be written there, for example. I've never seen this before. But in principle, this is only theoretically possible, and perhaps we will see it in a couple of years. The devil knows. Let's move on. Next question. A question from a person I know well. If you can change it this way, and does not look at the power, why an antique, when you can replace it by MIDIM? There's no need, I'll say that. Here. And despite the fact that I am the developer of an anti-detect and so on, it is advantageous for me to say that, for example, an anti-detect would completely replace everything, and it, or rather an anti-detect, is irreplaceable. No, I can say that we will replace it, and I said this at the very beginning of the webinar. That a person who learns how to use Tampermonkey normally does not actually need any antidote. After all, in fact, come on, let's look sensibly. Few people work with a large number of web resources. Well, I mean they're with 10, 20, 30. In fact, if people work, then this is 1 or 2, maximum 3 web resources. It's ideal to check them for all fingerprints, but it's a matter of, well, a maximum of 2 weeks only. And, accordingly, in 2 weeks, you have a full alignment of your web resources. And change whatever you want and stay. This is your personal product. You made it for yourself. You will do it very well and efficiently. Accordingly, you will work, let's say, differ from all other users of anti-detects, and not differ from real users. If you do everything right. Therefore, as I said, yes, Tampermonkey in principle can replace any anti-detect. Let's move on. Friends, I do not know how many opportunities there will be to answer questions, because there are now more than 500 questions already. It's unrealistically cool. So, the following. I'm skipping the flood here, where people just spoke out. So again, a question from a person I know. In this way, you can substitute an image or canvas, any other print in fact. Next question. Question from user Alexi. What can you say about Perfect Canvas? I have no idea, I do not know of such an extension. To be honest, I'm not really familiar with extensions. Earlier, sometime in the same 17th-16th year, I knew all the extensions by name, their features. And now, at the moment, I just understand that this is, well, let's just say, a children's sandbox without a clue. Not familiar, to be honest, the user Alexi is not familiar. So, let's move on. Fleet, so a large block of questions is also highlighted in bold. From user Andriy Vashik. Dima, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Andriy. I really liked the way you told me about the substitution of Khan's fingerprint. Thank you. I have 2 questions. Why are you telling me this at all? The thing is, why? As I said, the most important anti-detect is in the user's heads. I've never hidden anything. If there is any technology, it is, for example, better than another one, or better than the one I have, yes. I always talk about it. I can find it, but you need to be adequate all the same. Otherwise, if I was trying to hide something, I would have made my own anti-detection browser long ago, and would spit at the ceiling. Here. But, unfortunately, this is not possible. You need to be honest with yourself first of all. So, the main question is, does the Patreon version of Anti-Detect 4, Anti-Detect 5, or the staff version of your Anti-Detect itself not replace Canvas? The first one is Anti-Detect 4. It had a substitution system. It was located on the Antios tab. It was called Fake Canvas, Fake Web Jail. But the anti-detect of the 4th version did not use hardware acceleration. And it really was a big problem. In the anti-detect of the 5th version, we have hardware acceleration fully working. And there is a system for replacing canvases and web jail. But as I said earlier, unfortunately, due to certain bugs that are associated with this hardware acceleration system, we have not yet given users access to fingerprint substitution. I'll explain why. At the moment, we have collected a large number of logs, and thanks to these logs, we analyzed what the problem is with users with graphics acceleration. Because physically, when you release a product, you can't take it to test it on several thousand machines. It's unreal. Thanks to the users, we realized that on a certain model of drivers, on a certain model of the operating system, there are certain problems, what they are related to, and so on. At the moment, we have completely fixed absolutely everything. Absolutely everything. We are waiting now to receive a signature from Microsoft. We distribute personal versions further with a signature. So, if everything is okay, then it's cool. We just tell you where to find the menu, how to turn it on. Otherwise, if, relatively speaking, I tell you now how to enter it, we will get even more bug reports. Because we have not completed the first part. That is, relatively speaking, we have not finished yet, but we are collecting the child for school. You know, I mean, what do we get when we're done? but it will need to be looked at already. Let's move on. How exactly is canon substitution implemented in your solution? My solution is implemented as follows, very simple. It all depends on our directs in fact. I won't delve into the mechanics of the work, but if you take, relatively speaking, a snippet from real machines, the constants that direct stores, then you can recreate them on another PC, which, as a matter of fact, I did. Therefore, in my case, substitution does not occur in the browser, it occurs at the directs level. And we tell directs the constants that it needs. VirtualBox, it is in VirtualBox, I repeat, works as follows. There is a so-called GPU tunnel that requests graphics processing constants from the host computer, and then transmits them through this tunnel to the guest machine. If we intercept them at this point and substitute them, then we can tell the guest computer absolutely any values. Any of these values lead to the rendering of graphics in the parameters that we need. That's it. That is, I have completely 100% the same as real systems in all browsers. Well, for now, let's say so. What would you recommend now for anti-detect for? And I would advise you to forget about anti-detect for. But, unfortunately, it has really ceased to be relevant. I would say that it has ceased to be, well, yes, it has been relevant for a couple of months now. It is possible to work on it, but I would not advise it. Should I check the box so that Google is automatically installed? It's worth it. I would not use the hardening mode in modern browsers, and in the anti-interactive 5, I cut out this mode altogether. It is reduced to just a few functions. And if a preset has already been selected, do I need to manually prescribe something to enable hardening? You can enable it through the Antios menu, of course, in the 5th version, but I repeat, I do not advise you. The fact is that hardening was relevant in the 4th version. In the 5th version, it is no longer relevant. We have implemented a lot of mechanisms that, well, because of which it is simply not needed. Well, that's all I have to tell you. I hope I answered your question, Andre. Next. So, there are a lot of questions here. The user IA reports about some kind of service type. Sue. Honestly, I don't know. It's the first time I see. And the user says that this is a checker tip, Sue. Hell knows, I have no idea, to be honest, this is the first time I've seen him. I'll take a look at why not at my leisure. Maybe there is something interesting there too. If instead of further. So, now I approve the message. There are a lot of messages, so sorry that it took so long. If, instead of the user's question, a novel, if instead of the Lix browser, check the AIPI for some kind of AIDS test. Well, I don't see anything wrong with the AIDS test, because it is used everywhere. That is, and on. I met him, in my opinion, and on the TV, even on some installed one. I don't even remember now, it's on Philips in my opinion. I went into an electronics store a couple of months ago. I saw an AIDS test on the screen of one of the TVs. By the way, I was surprised. Therefore, in my understanding, it is a fairly legitimate web resource, and there will be no problems. I would not say that he is associated with some kind of anti-fraud. We go further. Next question. The next question is from user Michael Fitcher. It will wipe the metrics. Can I tell you more about what's new? In fact, nothing new of such a supernatural has appeared. They have a system, as far as I can follow them. I repeat, I currently do not have a subscription to their service. At the moment, what I know about them, they are preparing a positioning system. What does this mean? Do you remember the web resource that we turned to today? A .onlinematrix.net, in my opinion, that's what it was called. There is a specific IP address behind this web resource. We understand that, Everything is cool. He is alone at the moment. As far as I know, and can't say that it will be 100%, but as far as I understand from the information received from them, they are going to do the following. They're going to do something like the choice of TC positioning. How will this work? Servers are scattered all over the world. That is, for example, one server is located in Vietnam, another in the USA, the third is located in France, the fourth in Germany. And when a user goes to a web resource managed by Tritmetrix, there is a connection with different servers. Ping request, TC ping selection. And thus, a web resource can determine that, for example, a ping to you from the USA will be huge. In comparison with a ping to you from Vietnam, well, for example. And thus, in principle, it is possible to assume that the user uses some kind of proxy, VPN, or where in theory he is located. Of course, I say this in general terms, but I hope you understand the approximate essence. Let's move on. Another user asks about the perfect canvas one. Unfortunately, I don't know about this extension. You check and say, I gave you the full source code, and, just in case, I will now duplicate the address of the web resource. You can download the source code from there and keep it for yourself. I still recommended you all to do it. Here I have just added this web resource. Let's move on. Next question. A question from the user Jacob. Do you have any analogs of your SPI Wi-Fi application, which can also calculate the distance? There is no Wi-Fi except SPI, alas. Why? Because I didn't. I haven't seen any analogs of my SPI Wi-Fi software anywhere, and at the moment it makes sense to do what it already is. We need to extend the Wi-Fi connection. It was until the 17th of March, if I'm not mistaken. Well, if a large number of users want to, okay, I'll buy a subscription again from Google and renew it if it's interesting. The second question. Do you use modified versions of ChatGPT, WarmGPT to work, in which examples you used it? No, I don't trust such resources. I'll explain why. Look, the same G5 chat is great, cool stuff, but in fact I use it. I have the top subscription for $200. I don't know what the fuck she is to me, well, she just is. I really like the research system there. She's just really cool. And it helps me a lot when I work with some exotic languages that I do not know. Alas, I was a programmer in my distant past, so to speak. Exactly, so that professionally. For example, now I'm going to be put in jail for some Golang. I basically understand that. I will understand the architecture, I will understand how it works, but it will be problematic for me to do something quickly of my own. That's why I use, for example, GPT chat. And about the supposedly dark chats in quotes here, I don't like them. I'll explain for what reason. Because who created them and why? The first one. Yes, you can say that they were created there by some very fucking famous person, who again, some kind of bitch, will turn out to be a fucking Santa Claus who loves everyone very much, but he loves everyone from behind. That's why, alas, I don't use such web resources. I have my own neural network, which I train, with which I just play, so to speak. I'm playing, and it's not a commercial product. I'm just interested in understanding how it works. Not from the side to use and exploit as an assistant, like a GPT chat, but more from the side of a companion, you can say so. Therefore, no, I do not use either a fraud or a thief. I have not used it, and I will not. Next question. Question from the user Arthur. What do you say about the anti-fraud? There is information that changes and that he does not analyze in 2025 year. To be honest, Arthur, there is no new information on the Google ecosystem at all, in general. One thing I can say is that if you have the opportunity to create more than 6 DMLs in a row, then everything is fine, and you can work. I mean, without a phone. The fact is that users very often confuse anti-fraud systems, anti-bot systems. Google has anti-fraud, it is aimed at working only with payments. That's it. In all other respects, it is an anti-bot. And you need to understand that if, for example, the same mail is not given to you to give up using SIMs, without SIMs more precisely, then the system suspects you of something. And it means that you need to pay attention to this. That's it. Unfortunately, I can't say anything more. Well, I haven't heard anything new. The next question is a question from user Dennis. I found your project Vector T13 of the Detect firewall on GitHub. This is still relevant to use. But if you love archaeology, then why not? In fact, it is. What version was it? The 42nd version of the Mozilla. The relevance is approximately the month of January 2017. The month of August is 2000 of the 17th year. July 2017. Here is its relevance. In other words, how much is the project already getting? 8 years. Well, what kind of relevance can we talk about here? Although, by the way, it's interesting, I still have one little man there who, I don't know where he got so much energy from. But for some reason, he tests some exotic systems, exotic browsers all the time. Then he tells me they're about the Polymoon browser, Pale Moon. I'm sorry if he called it wrong. Then he talks about the fact that he is good at working with Windows XP. Well, therefore, you can check, you never know, suddenly you will now put yourself a 42nd Mozilla, and everything will go well for you. The devil knows. Apparently, you just need to think a little differently than everyone thinks now. Maybe this will appear, but in fact I want to say that it is unlikely, because there is such a thing in the anti-fraud as an outdate browser. Well, that's the end of it. Let's go to the next question. Question from user Reese. How do you like Dubai in general? Does the heat melt the brain too much? How has the climate affected productivity? I'm kind. Risa, greetings. I feel great, I'm finally at ease. European values have become very alien to me. I'm not going to say anything bad, but that part of the world, it's definitely not for me. Well, this is just too much. It's just called so fucked up. This is Europe, but these 3 years of living in the Netherlands, there were a lot of good things. But when you have to pay 50% of your income in order to feed homeless people and faggots for your money. But, fuck, I don't agree. Well, I will never be integrated into such a system. Sorry, but for me, a person who does nothing, I don't have to pay for this person. So it's good here, there are strict laws here, I don't hear here. There was one story. Now I will tell you about the month of January or December. Something like that, the winter months. Literally shortly before leaving, I was sitting in a bar, my local bar. The bartenders are familiar and two interesting things. One interesting thing was, there were 2 bartenders, 2 dudes. One of them is called Harry, both Dutch. And one day I came to a bar, it was maybe a year ago, I don't remember when. I came to the bar, and with another bartender Ian, and that Harry is hanging out on the street. Ian says, so he has a sexual trauma. I'm like, what do you mean, sexual trauma? Well, like, if you recognize yourself as, well, like as unconventional, then you can go to your doctor. There does not go to a therapist, you can just write to the doctor. Well, write by mail or write to him in WhatsApp. You can write to him that you, like, got injured during sex. And the doctor will say, no question, he will send a letter to your employer. And the employer gives you a week or 2, depending on the injury, which you may not get. He gives you a vacation, and you are with full pay. In other words, you get paid money, and you do whatever you want. And you can hang out on the street, right in front of your workplace. Why? Because it's useful to hang out on the street. Walking is useful. Well, here's the situation. And then I was literally a couple of months before I left. This is what I said: the situation is a woman of a strange age. I don't know, maybe 40 to 60 years old. It was difficult to determine. It was difficult to determine. She was expressing her emotions quite loudly. I don't understand Dutch at all. I haven't learned this language in principle. I'm at the bartender. I'm asking this Ian, what's going on there? Wait, there's a complete fuck-up going on. I think, well, I'll wait. Then he comes and tells me, it turns out that this woman's child was raped orally in the toilet at school for several months. He said some kind of class, I don't remember. Something like a teenager. The child's name was Ellie. And, as a matter of fact, the police disavowed it. The school's management also disavowed. Why did they disown? Because Ellie said she didn't mind, she didn't mind. And everything is basically fine. Yes, that is, your child is being raped by a crowd of foreigners in the toilet. Yes, everything is fine. The only thing that, as it turned out at the very end, Ellie is a male name. Well, after that, I rolled my eyes and realized that I definitely had nothing to do in this country. And the mother, by the way, the police advised her to contact the Committee of Mothers of Children who have been sexually harassed. They have committees, for example, the Powsham Committee. Here they go every few months to do a check of the Powsham. And this, apparently, is the Committee on Sexual Violence. I mean, I don't know, they're probably going to. Hello, hello. Oh, your ass was fucked yesterday, mine yesterday. We put it in his mouth yesterday. Let's be friends. Well, about apparently so. Well, that's so, according to the rant. Dubai is beautiful, magnificent. I'm going to live here. The next question is from the worker user. You can use Safari with profiles and Tampermonkey as an anti-detect. Will this bypass fingerprint com? Worker: yes, you can. Yes, it will bypass. But, by the way, about the fingerprint, I repeat once again, this is not even a hiding person. This is already a specific anti-fraud system. Well, damn, if in the case of a pixel scan, he at least tries to disguise himself in some way, then the finger is not masked at all. And to go there, to try to do something, to use this checker before work, but this is complete idiocy, utter. Next question. Question from user Lana Rhodes. When is the build with Geobox? At the moment, we are not conducting very intensive negotiations with the creators of the Geobox. I think we will share with you the results of these negotiations in the next few weeks. So far, I can't give a clearer answer. Some things depend on them, some things depend on me. So something like that. Next question. A question from a NAR user. Hi Victor. Hello NAR. I wanted to know what changes have been made in the anti-fraud sticks this year. What should I pay more attention to when multi-accounting sticks? Always pay attention to the IP6, which you are currently receiving, with which you can now get a lot more information. Then with the help of IP4, do not forget. And for some reason, many users completely ignore the presence of IP6. Do not forget about one of the types of camas that I showed today, and just in which I mentioned a stick. Well, in principle, in general, probably everything. They are quite a closed system, that is, what they do at home, but it feels like they sometimes don't even understand themselves. They are somehow like WoW firmwit. There are a lot of things they want to implement, but in fact, I observe when they are constantly being followed by some new, let's call them that, spare parts on a web resource. Then they disappear somewhere, new ones appear. That is, they are testing something, they are trying something, but I can't draw your attention to anything in particular. Except for these highlights of IP6 and the new canvas. Next question. Question from Amazon Personal user. Tell me, which latency can be considered valid for mobile proxies? Amazon, I can't answer your question, I'll explain why. In order to answer it, you need to provide some specific example. Understand, but if I tell you, for example, 100 milliseconds, yes, is this a good latency or not? For Amazon, for example, it may be bad, for PayPal it may be good. In other words, where is the resource located, Where are you? Well, I would say that in principle, well, more than 200 milliseconds, 250 even I would say. It's not quite good for everyone anymore. Absolutely for everyone. But if we are still considering mainly work in the USA, then it is still better to strive for the ideal and reduce it there to at least 200. Well, in principle, 250 is also an absolutely normal latency. Next question. Question from user Anatoly. Are you planning a free or trial anti-detector? Anatoly, it is not planned. There used to be such a product, but it was like a demo version or something. His main task was to attract people to my product. But at the moment, we absolutely do not need attraction, and I do not even advertise my product anywhere in fact. And there are more than enough customers. So making a free product now means adding a lot of load to support, and adding a lot of load to programmers who will receive more orders due to advertising. We are currently not allowed to do this. So, alas, no. Next question. Oh, I missed one question. All right. Questions from user Douglas. Are UD proxies suitable for the Studio browser? I have no idea. I don't work with this software, so it's better for you to try to find out for yourself. A question from the user Barmalay. How important is the use of IP6 when working on UC? Specifically on the example of geocomplays and banks. Barmalay is incredibly important. As I just answered your colleague about PayPal, the use of IP6 is incredibly important when working in the USA. Why? Because in fact, as of last year, I had statistics of 96% of users and subscribers in the United States connected to IP6. And accordingly, if you do not use, for example, you are, well, for example, okay, subscriber, mobile operator. These T supports IP6. And then you come, who uses mobile proxies, and you don't have IP6. Well, will that set you apart from everyone else? Of course it will. Or in the same way, Comcast supports IP6 New York. Comcast is 100% connected to IP6. Accordingly, and you suddenly use, for example, a resident proxy or something of this kind without IP6. There will be questions for you. Therefore, yes, of course, Barmalay, you have very correctly noticed that IP6 is very important. So, let's go to the next question. A question from a Meta user. Substitution in this way, I take it that substitution about Tampermonkey has something in common with substitution in your anti-detect. No, there is no about nothing in common. Everything is changing here, as I said earlier, at the level of DirectX. In other words, we do not do any manipulations in the browser at all. The next question is me. Some users repeat the questions. I'm not going to answer them now. Next question. Question from user John. Will there be Canvas and WebGL substitution functionality in the Patreon version? John, this question is open at the moment. I haven't decided yet. I'll explain why I didn't decide. The fact is that in fact, Patreon is more like a demo, I would say so. In other words, it is designed to perform a certain kind of task. There, even the mere presence of hardware acceleration already helps to work with it without any problems. After all, this kind of substitution as we have, as I implemented with the help of Yandex Direct, it is more designed for larger web resources that are simply not supported by Patreon. The Patreon who? Twitter, Instagram, Google, and Amazon, eBay. Well, it doesn't matter to them at all in fact. Google, for example, is now registering with Patreon in the most magnificent way without changing the canvas and web's hell. Just because Google doesn't check them. It checks the canvas for anomalies to detect anti-detects and, accordingly, simply checks for hardware acceleration as a signal that you are not a bot or some kind of server. That's it. So the question is still open. In principle, I thought to introduce into Patreon, well, let's just say, maybe for all available video cards. The possibility of substitution, but I can't say yet. I'm not going to promise something that I'm not sure about right now. So, the next question. Questions from the user Yura. How can banks determine a substitute document so accurately from a photo, even if it is printed? Yura, I can't tell you 100% because the question is very vague. Which specific bank, which specific document, and so on. But if the document is printed, that is, it does not contain any hidden watermarks, hidden symbols, metadata, or anything in principle. I can't say I don't know. I am not very familiar with the fraud of documents. It is with the fraud of documents that I am not very familiar with. So I will not invent something that I do not know. And the question is vague. Would have been more specific, maybe something would have come to mind. And so far, alas, I can't say. The only thing I've seen on the market is solutions that promise a 99.9% definition of substitution. Well, I don't know, I can't say, I haven't tested them. Not a very grateful area, let's say. Why? Because multi-accounting is okay, we can justify it legally and be in a gray area. But if we implement a service for substitution and working with documents, but there is no way I can get out of the fact that I did it in order to. Well, why did I do it? I can't find any legal justification. There's the theft of personal data and everything else. Therefore, sorry, this is not my diocese. Next question. A question from the user Barmely. I noticed that network fingerprints are in many ways almost key. What type of connection is ideal in your opinion, even if it's about raising your proxies? What kind of equipment and what should be emphasized? Barmely, I'll give you an example. The question is really great, but the answer to it is unambiguous. I would recommend absolutely nothing. All the solutions that are currently on the market, I mean network protocols, absolutely all of them are subject to detection. That's it, there are no exceptions. But there are a few interesting features. In particular, I would like to highlight again the two most popular protocols we have, the WireGuard protocol and the OpenVPN protocol. OpenVPN can be pumped in the most magnificent way. Well, for example, I'll tell you, you want a joke right now. By the way, if anyone is interested, you can try it at home. With the help of the G5 chat, here I am again sending, I will send you there. We used to send Google, and now I'm going to send a chat to 5. With the help of G5 chat, ask how it is possible to implement a parallel connection to the same OpenVPN tunnel. It would seem, why this question? Why the fuck is it needed, right? But if you mess around a bit with the OpenVPN client, you can connect to the same tunnel several times. And do you know what will happen to you? Incredible magic will happen to you. Your connection will grow proportionally in speed and decrease in ping. Do you want to make yourself a 1 gigabit connection? Please connect 10 tunnels to 10 times in parallel. So that's why I remembered it so much now. OpenVPN is superbly subject to modification. But there is one but. One thing that will not allow you to do all these modifications normally. Either you have to work on Linux, or if you want, on Windows, you still have to get a signature from Microsoft. And Microsoft is very bad about signing someone else's software and other people's drivers. There will be a huge number of problems, but in fact, with the help of OpenVPN, it is possible to implement substitution of absolutely all network fingerprints, everything that will be needed. Because at its core, a VPN connection does not change host fingerprints, unlike SOCKS. SOCKS, for example, when you connect to SOX does not take your traffic transmission constants, for example. The TCP protocol, it will use the server traffic transmission constants, and OpenVPN will be transparent. And it will always show your real traffic transmission constants, your DCP packet headers from your tail computer. Therefore, OpenVPN can, in principle, play with it. And even I had such thoughts, somehow I tried, but I didn't bring it to mind, because, well, either to redo the entire proxy industry, or it's not necessary yet. Maybe then there will be a demand for it. Why did I mention AirGuard yet? The AirGuard is not such a technological solution, and it is quite easy to determine that it is being used. But this solution is incredibly simple and very small. And you can easily redo it very much for, let's say, a new protocol, relatively speaking. Well, that's the only thing I would like to highlight. And I would not like to touch the technology of SOX and everything else, because there is nothing good in the public. If you want something to work well, do it yourself. Well, that's it. Next question. A question from a worker user. How do I change the Tampermonkey ID on iOS? You can download the extension via iOS files in the same way, as far as I remember. Didn't do it manually, so you can check. I don't think it's going to be a big problem. So, the following. There are a lot of questions here, friends, a lot of questions to which I have already given approximate answers about Canvas, Geobox. Canvas for some reason has a lot of questions. I'll skip them. So, once again a question from a good person. A few words will be about the social rating. Just wondering, what's new that we don't know? About the social rating. You know such a system, well, let's go back, okay, an excursion to 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I said that there was a social rating. A year ago, I made a social rating verification system. 6 months ago, I made a social rating leveling system. Unfortunately, this project, I can't say that it didn't work out, but it somehow turned out and didn't work out at the same time. What do I mean by that? For some reason, the social rating was mostly not understood by users. That is, here I made a pumping system, I showed how it all works and so on, what results you can achieve. But the users didn't want to, showed very little interest. Maybe I got it wrong, maybe I should have advertised it, I don't know. And in fact, this service has disappeared from mass use. Why? Because those who are a couple of people literally, and only 2 people exactly. 2 people who appreciated how the social rating works, they gave me the opportunity to work only with them and get a lot more than I received. Relatively speaking, each person has his own ban payment, and he can pump an unlimited number of boxes for a month. That's it, the person is satisfied. If, for example, you use the same resources for the crowd, then there will be much less money, and hemorrhoids and the load on support will be much more. Therefore, those who have understood how it works, everything is wonderful and good for them. So people pay a very large amount of money, believe me. But in general, what else can I say? Our favorite IP quality score system has also introduced a social rating. If 2 years ago we were talking only about Cybersoft, now LexisNexis, which we talked about today, has a social rating, as far as I remember. IP Quality Score has officially stated on its web resource that they have a social rating. Castle also received, Data House also received a social rating. That is, everyone passed this chip, everyone realized how good it is. It's a pity that our users, our colleagues here, did not pass through how fucking cool this is. And how much they don't care about all the prints if you have a good social rating. But we have what we have. Well, about IP quality soon, I was surprised, by the way. They openly stated right on their web resource that they now have this rate in their tariffs. They write directly. We track all payments by your mail, and so on. Well, cool, cool. So, the next question. Next question. The question from the user is 1212. Friends, we will be wrapping up now in 15 minutes because we have a certain time frame. So, the question from the user is 1212. The first question. I would like to hear from you about macOS and Safari, and that if you create a new user, you can work quietly. Is it true? And yes and no. I will explain why and yes and no again. Up to the Bixer system, well, that is, up to the Bixer system and including Bixer. Bicker or Bixer? I don't know. Before the Bicker system, it was possible to work without any problems with additional gadgets in the operating system itself. Since the Bix system, I have talked about it many times, I have a feeling as if this computer no longer belongs to me. That is, well, what you're not trying to do in some way correctly, what worked before, absolutely does not work now. It feels like the Apple company is like, well, giving you this computer as if to use it, as if it's not yours. You paid for it, but it feels like it's not yours. You know how guest access was given earlier? That's how it is in some game libraries, for example, in cyberclubs and so on. You have guest access, that's it, you can't do a damn thing with this computer. Therefore, I would not say anything good about macOS and Safari. Safari, the only good thing about it is that it lacks many apps that are adhered to by Chrome, well, and modern browsers. And accordingly, you do not need to bother about substituting certain values. But do not forget that Safari also has its own apps, which are not in Chrome, and users sometimes forget about this. Therefore, at the moment, I would not say that this solution is a good one. Once it was, now it is unlikely. And the second question. I would really like to get a comment from you regarding Safari macOS. It's just that Apple itself is responsible for the privacy of its users, since, as far as I'm aware, even hid devices can't count macOS Safari users. As far as I know, they can't and never have been. In principle, there has never been such an opportunity at all. Therefore, with regard to privacy, I can't say anything either good or bad. I repeat, I am not a regular macOS user. I have these poppies, they are present, and sometimes I have to communicate with them. It used to be very good to communicate with them. I loved them very much when I released these protected MacBooks. It was really cool, super. I was very well versed. Now, alas, I have slightly moved away from this topic, but, again, I do not see any prospects in the development of this case. Right now, let's say. It is in the sense in which we are talking with you. When we talk about the same thing, for example, working with Tampermonkey on an iPad or on iOS. It's interesting. I wonder why. Because in this case, we are using technology that no one has worked with. We now have a unique chance to use it in our direction. That is, relatively speaking, the same beloved people has never seen it cheated, for example. From a nuclear power plant, relatively speaking. Therefore, he will treat iOS as loyally as possible. What will happen in a month, what will happen in 2, I can't say. With regard to macOS and Safari, the situation is slightly different here. If we take MacBooks, not only MacBooks, iMacs are the same. There are many services that allow you to rent them out. You can find. I have used these here, and they are being scammed very well, very well. Therefore, in general, due to the fact that they have unified prints, I can't say that there is anything good about Safari and macOS. Well, I can't. Who maybe has more experience will give more comments. I have in this. I don't see any development in this direction. So, let's move on. Go on, go on. Oleg, I heard you, I understand. So, the next question, again a question from David. On the new build of Windows 11, Of course, definitely Windows 11. Question from user Yura. And what about the Do Plus Mobile Anti-Detect? What good is it? Here, Yura, to be honest, this is the first time I heard about this anti-detect from you. I can't keep track of these anti-detects anymore. I watched when there were at least 150 of them there. There are already more than 200 of them. It feels like every day these new antiques just come out, and they are plus or minus the same. Damn, the devil will break his leg. And about the mobile, but I haven't met it, I don't know. I'll see if I can tell you something at the next webinar. But again, it needs to be tested, looked at. According to a web resource, there may be one thing, but in fact it may be completely different. So, the next question. Question from the Combinator user. Can I have an explanation? It is not worth trying yourself on any checkers, therefore, how should you check yourself? Well, I'll tell you this, if you doubt yourself, then, as they said in one Guy Ritchie film, doubts create chaos and lead you to death. Therefore, there is no need to doubt yourself. If you doubt whether you will jump over a certain obstacle or not, you will never jump over. That's such bullshit. Well, if in fact the best option is this, I showed you today the checker of these canvases, right? Well, is it difficult for you to do the same for WebGL, for audio, or what will you check? It's not that hard, right? So I don't think there will be a problem. Next question, a question from user John. Judd for Plus Network Fingerprinting. What can you say about him? Great technology, great, just great. The germ that came from him, more precisely, is a technology, the germ of a more modern technology, called M1. And M1D1. A great system is this 4 Plus for obtaining network fingerprints of the user. However, it has one definite disadvantage: it does not work with the UDP protocol, does not work with the QUIC protocol, and even more so does not work with the Web Transport Protocol. And it's so cool, I like it. I'm honestly here, I'm without any sarcasm. So, the next question is from the user. Dear Dmitry, hello. Hello, dear Cross. And Microsoft has also changed something in its fraud systems. Earlier on the 4th, when she first came out, Bing behaved well. Then, the advertising offices were banned for an hour or two. Now it seems to be much better in the 5th. Give tips on working with Microsoft. Cross. That's when we talked about Google. Google has an anti-bot system and anti-fraud systems. Basically, they have a fierce anti-bot system. If we are talking about Microsoft, then we are talking about complete utter chaos and even, I would say, a touch of idiocy. I'll explain why. Because I work with him every day. Every day I work with one or another part of Microsoft. What can I say? A good one. Nothing. There are some changes, there are a lot of changes globally. Here is an absolutely huge amount, I can't even keep track of them. On my own, I want to say that Microsoft's pace is set by their subsidiary Cyber, which I have already talked about many times. And they, among other things, are the inventors of the social rating. Therefore, we do not forget that social rating is extremely important for working with Microsoft. Because the social rating will allow you to appear as a real person, not a bot. If we consider work in the current realities, then in addition to the social rating, we definitely need hardware acceleration 100% for 100%. Unfortunately, we will not be able to work from the servers normally. That's why it is in the 5th version that you experience fewer problems than in version number 4. Version number 4 is not recommended for use at all at the moment. Then the next question. Question from user Andriy Vaskivchik. Dmitry, do you think there is a chance of dying on if you work with Yesem? Andriy Vashik, the chance of dying on is absolutely the same as if you work with a regular SIM card. Absolutely no different. So, although, here's an interesting point you just said. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll explain why I was thinking. when there is information after all more. If I'm not mistaken, Andre, I will study this question and be sure to answer it in the next webinar. But if I'm not mistaken, when working with SE, more information is reported than when working with a regular SIM card. If, when working with a regular SIM card, only the user's name is actually reported, then for working with eSIM, registration takes place, the geoposition is checked, our radio module is checked again, plus its identifier, plus the identifier of our mail. Here. But you need to look at the specification. I think it seems to me that eating a SIM would be worse. But when it seems it is necessary to be baptized, so I'd better study it and tell you in more detail. Question from user Gleb. I am a new student in the course of hacking anti-fraud systems. Now, at the beginning of the training in the first module, a question arose by mail. I started the Cubase of emails. Now the method that was in the video does not work. When I go to the mail, they write the mail is deactivated. But when I want to register it, writes, choose a different login address. How do I get old social emails with a history now? Social Raid Finder does not work. When will it work? Social Raid Finder will not work in the near foreseeable future. This is the first bad news. The second news is those logins that you say they don't work, that is, he writes on the checker that he is good. But there is no opportunity to register. These are logins that were associated with crime, or were associated with the spread of spam, malware, and so on. You need to understand that in the databases that you could buy, yes, I understand that you bought this database, as you say. You most likely bought a login password database. The login password database, if it was located somewhere, it means that this IP address could have been used for sending spam or malicious software, for which it was blocked. An excellent option would be to buy not databases from the type of email password, but databases, for example, subscriptions to some service. Well, do not forget that you can find these databases yourself with the help of a software called Havage. Let's move on. Next question. A question from the user. Factor TD1. Hi there. Hello, Factor TD1. Which anti-detect browser do you think is the best? In my opinion, one that you can create yourself. This is the only option. Since paying, I'm not going to say it directly is really bad, because there are really cool software products that combine ease of use and pretty good functionality. But, unfortunately, I cannot single out any particular one among them. Therefore, it seems to me that if you can make yourself a browser yourself with the help of Tampermonkey, then this will be the best option. Here's the next question. Question from user Ruslan. So, the big question. Greetings, Dmitry. Here's about the latest VirtualBox update. When the emulation was delivered, where the emulation of ARM processors was delivered, is it worth expecting an Android emulator with an anti-detect of functionality from you? Ruslan, yes, it's worth it. I talked about this at the beginning of our webinar today, because Google is tightening the screws, or there is a deviation in the firmware. Yes, I understand. I understand what you're talking about. Yes, it's worth expecting. I want to look at what Oracle has implemented, because, again, they do not always implement everything qualitatively. The latest builds of VirtualBoxing are just pure hell. I have never seen such a large number of errors. How much do I work with VirtualBoxing for? 8 years already. 8 years. And for 8 years, I've seen such a cunt. I'm sorry, but I definitely haven't seen it. So something like that. So, well, dear friends, let's probably finish now. It's 8:30 on my watch right now. It took 2 hours and 30 minutes for our webinar today, of which we spent 1 hour answering questions. It was a long time ago when we devoted so much time. I apologize to everyone whose questions I didn't have time to answer. However, as practice shows, people have a lot of questions. And you can spend 4, 5, 6 hours just answering questions. Therefore, the best option would be to leave your feedback about the current webinar, whether you liked it or not.